Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 27, where we talk all things ABL, a 30-team dynasty league with 20 spots per team for minor leaguers, which is a glorious 600 prospects. And of course, there are more on the waiver wire, which is part of what we're going to talk about tonight, or off-season targeting of prospects. And I am very fortunate to be joined by a long-ago guest in an abbreviated episode 3, Sam of the ABL Rangers. So without further ado, I will bring Sam onto the stage. Good, Sam. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, I've been wanting to have you back on the show because when we were first on together, we had some technical problems and we had to cut the show short. Epic technical failure on behalf of the ABL, down on the farm team. But we're back together, and hopefully we get through this. We got your goldfish in the background, and I got my bear, so we're all set to go. I'm interested to talk about a bunch of things tonight with you about prospecting. But first, one of the topics that we were covering in our first time together was some leading indicators, some metrics that you like to look to when you're evaluating prospects. And one of the really interesting things that you mentioned on that show to me, and we really didn't get to finish the conversation, was doubles as a leading indicator of power. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that. And also anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of leading metrics that you look at when evaluating prospects.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, one of the things that I probably value even over home runs is doubles, and to a lesser extent triples. I kind of put them in the same category. Triples are just doubles that got lucky, right? But ultimately, when I'm looking for prospects, we talked about the age differential, and a lot of these younger guys, you and I both like to get the 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old prospects.
Right.
See what happens with them, right? And it's not very realistic to expect a 17 or 19-year-old to be hitting a lot of home runs. It's just not. It's very rare that occurs. And so if you're looking to identify those guys when they're young and well below, the age range for the league that they're playing in, I actually look at the doubles. So somebody that I don't want is somebody with 25 home runs and 18 doubles. I would almost never own a prospect like that if I could help it. That feels like empty power to me. I would much rather have, I think Eloy Jimenez had like 50 doubles in Double-A one year, and that's like exactly what I'm looking for, because if you're 21 years old and you're hitting 40, 50 doubles, I think Connor Norby is up there in that range, Tyler Black, et cetera, right? When you add their doubles and triples together, they're 40, 50
right.
plus extra base hits. And both those guys have some home runs to go along with them as well. But sure. I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned with, 15 home runs if you've got 50 other extra base hits, because it tells me you're hitting the ball hard, and you're probably hitting it to all fields. If you're just pulling the ball, they're gonna move that outfielder over. They're gonna pinch the gap, and you're gonna lose those doubles. So somebody with 50 doubles has got to be spraying the ball all over and spraying it really hard. And so I did an analysis in grad school 16 years ago where I looked at when power really develops, and probably not applicable today because training and all that has come a long way since 2008, right? But it was kind of like 26, 27 is when the power really started to peak for most major league players. And again, how do you forecast that out? You're looking at those non-home run extra base hits in their younger years.
Right. So, I think that's a really excellent point. Because their bodies just are not as physically mature, right? So are they hitting those doubles? Another thing that I look at is, if I can get the data, what their exit velocity is at that level. Mm-hmm. And, are they stinging it above the league average? It doesn't have to be like, O'Neill Cruz level exit velocities. What I'm looking for is it above replacement level? Is it above the league average? And if they're like below the age for the level they're at, and they're hitting above the exit velocity average, like I get pretty excited about that, even if the home runs
Yep.
haven't shown up yet, right?
Yep.
You know, and I've said this before. I look at, you know, frame too, and whether there's projectability left on the frame when they're that young. How much do you look at that?
Yeah, so when you go into the MILB.com or whatever you're looking at, right, and you're scrolling down, the first two things that you see there are age and frame. And I always take a look at that. I would say I consider it, but I don't. You know, you look at a Mookie Betts, for example, right? If you're frame only and you're looking at a Altuve, Mookie Betts, you know, George Springer, guys like that, like you're not going to see 30 home run in that 5-8, you know, Trey Turner, whatever, right? So it's not the correlation would be low, I think, you know, ultimately, or your R squared if you were to regress that out. It would be lower than some of the other things that we're talking about. But if I see somebody that's 6'1", 215, hey, that's a big guy, right? And so big enough.
If he's 17, if he's 215, you get pretty excited.
Yeah, for sure. If you're looking at, you know, a 6'3", 175-pound 17-year-old, I'm excited there as well, because there's room for 40 pounds of muscle to develop out of that player. You know, if they're 5'11", 165, what are they going to do? Get to 185? There's not as much runway, to your point.
Yeah, you're hoping for a growth spurt.
Yeah,
that's what you're hoping for at that point, which can happen. It can happen at that age, but you know, less likely.
But I'll say, you know, so I've played 28 seasons of baseball. Well, I'm entering my 28th this fall, and I'll say that hitting a home run is something that is not common outside of upper level professional ball, because you have to try to hit a home run. You don't just, you know, make good contact with the ball and it goes out. I mean, if you're a good hitter, sometimes you hit a home run and you weren't really trying to hit a home run. But by and large, especially as you look at the Ks go up and the home runs go up and, you know, the 3 outcome hitting scenarios, right? They are swinging for a home run when they are 27, 28, 30 years old in the pros. 17-year-old kids aren't doing that. 20-year-old kids aren't doing that. They're still being coached on how to add that launch angle, how to make that. And really, when you go to the plate and you don't have the confidence, you're you know, promoting up through the levels, and you're just trying to keep your job and move to the next day. You just want to hit the ball as hard as you can. You want to pick your pitch, you want to pick your location, and you want to make the best contact you can. And, you know, so you look at a guy like Ivan Melendez, who might hit a whole bunch of home runs right now. He's trying to hit a home run because he's not a good enough hitter to just make good hard contact all the time. You look at his whiff rate, you look at his strikeouts, all the things, right? And then he doesn't have any walks, and it's because the pitcher knows they don't have to throw him the pitch because he's got holes in his swing. And so, again, if that younger player isn't hitting the home runs, it's probably because they're not even trying to. So if they're getting that 30, 40, 50 extra base hits, and then they're getting the attention of the hitting coach, and the hitting coach is saying, hey, look, you know, let's take a different approach. First strike, second strike, let's go for the fences. That third strike is where we're going to dial in and hit your double. You know, those are real conversations that happen.
Interesting. It sounds also like your experience playing ball, and you've been playing for a really long time, as you said, you know, kind of intentionally or indirectly has influenced your kind of view of prospecting in fantasy baseball. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely fair. You know, we as humans are heavily experiential. You know, it's hard for us to believe something that hasn't been true for us, and it's hard for us to be convinced something isn't true when it was true for us, right? And so that's why I look at other things like speed and defense, because if you're fast and you play good defense, there's always a place for you to figure your hit tool out. If you're not fast and you can't play defense, you've got a very short leash, right? So that's
you got to really be able to hit.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have, you know, 72 months in the minors to figure it out. You're not going to get that 5-6 year stretch to figure it out from 17 to 23 if if you can't do one of the two, hit or play defense and have speed. And so another thing that I look at is that stolen base metric, which is really off right now because of the different rules. And so everybody is running all the time. But if you take a guy like Carson Williams, for example, and he might have 20, 30 stolen bases, but he's got 13 caught stealings, that will not translate into the major leagues. Like that, there's no speed there. You know,
he's running. He's just running.
He's just running. He's just running.
Yeah.
That's right. Because he can now. You know, the bases are bigger, and the balk rule and all that. You know, the pickoff rule, and so people are going more, and that's just part of the game. But when he gets to the pros, Carson Williams will not be a runner.
Yeah.
But if you're a Tyler Black and you're 40-3 or whatever, you know, that speed is going to steal 20 bases in the pros. And so I'm like, all right, Tyler Black came up. He's going to score fantasy points for me, even if he's hitting 220 for a while he figures it out.
Right. Well, you know, you mentioned something about having a shorter leash if you can't play defense. You don't have natural speed. You know, another thing that can happen, at least I found, is you can be slower in terms of promotions. You know, the organization's not going to accelerate you because they don't have as much desire to do that. They have other players who can play a more well-rounded game they're willing to invest in. And that can be affected through coaching, like how much coaches are actually going to pay attention to the player. And then also promotion up to, you know, who are they going to pick to advance from low A ball to high A ball? You know, it's more likely going to be the guy who can play defense and run a little bit too, rather than the slow-footed hitter. So that's something that I look at as well.
Yeah, a guy we were talking about, you know, in DMs a few weeks ago, Jordan Walker, you know, is not known for his defensive prowess, and he's bounced around a bit, third base, right field, whatever, right? And the organization is like, hey, I mean, had he been hitting 300, he would have stayed up there and they would have taken whatever he gave him, right? But that was an example of he came up, got a few weeks, was struggling at the plate, and they're like, you know, we're not really getting a glove benefit. We don't have any speed here, and he's not putting the ball in play. Let's send him back down where he can work on all of that, you know. Whereas if you take somebody else that's maybe like a Jackson Holiday, who is a little more refined in some of those areas, you know, he came up, he didn't do really well. They put him back down, but he came back up relatively quickly, right? And so, you know, certainly.
Well, another guy is like a guy like Jackson Chourio, right? Who did not get off to a great start this year, but plays defense, can run. You know, it's not hurting him in the field, and they gave him a longer leash. And now he's turned it around. He's actually put together a nice, you know, first season in the majors.
Absolutely. That's 100% what I'm talking about. Yep.
So we talked a lot about hitting metrics that you look at. What about the pitching side? What do you tend to focus on there?
Yeah, so if you look at my ABL team, I don't really have any pitching prospects. And that's not – I go through this love-hate relationship with pitching prospects. At the end of the day, I have a starting pitching bent when it comes to fantasy, 30-team fantasy leagues. There's just nothing like an inexpensive starting pitcher. So, you know, I had Gilbert and Strider and Shane Mack, and, you know – I sold the farm to get them, and, you know, none of them are in my lineup. And, you know, so here we are today, right? And so in terms of productivity, I think hitters have a much higher hit rate of actually giving you something, at least something. You know, if you're Jeremy Pena and you come up and you're scoring 2.7 points per game or whatever, but you're playing 158 games at shortstop, like, and you're $3, that plays all day long in a 30-team league, and you can get a whole bunch of guys like that. Like Dylan Dingler just got called up, and, you know, I think you've got him rated as like a 2 or a 3 in the Prospect Handbook. But I'm like, the dude's probably going to start 100 games at catcher, and he'll score 2 to 2.5 points, maybe better, but probably 2.5 is his floor, you know, for a couple of years, and he's going to be a couple bucks. I paid nothing for the guy. You know, I get something there. Whereas you go to the pitching side, of things, and it's like you've got Gasser and Tiedemann and Painter and all these guys that you pay a whole lot for, and they get TJ, they break. Lesko falls apart and can't throw strikes, right? It's like Ben Joyce bouncing around, struggling. reliever, not really fantasy relevant. And these were expensive procurements in this league or other leagues that I've had him in, and I get nothing for it. And so it's like when I'm in this rebuilding mode where I have somewhat of a rotation in place, I really want somebody that will hit, that will be successful, that I can plug in a lineup for now for cheap and give me money to go buy starters, or that I can ship out for 5 for 1 and get the starter that I want. So that's a long answer to say right now I'm not in the prospect pitching market, but what I really look at is walk rate. I want to be at 4.5 at max. That's
a pretty low walk rate.
Well, I mean.
You're saying right? You're saying 4.5 per 9.
Yeah, per 9. So.
All right.
Yeah, it's not crazy. It's not crazy high. It's not crazy low. I feel like it's a middle of the road, right? But what
I thought you were talking about. I thought you were talking walk percentage. 4.5 is very low.
No. No, but you had like Clayton Kershaw who came up and he was about 4.5, right? And I was able to buy him everywhere because he was really cheap. But what I was looking for was a progression of his walks decreasing. So when he got to the pros, he was at 4.5. And he was one of the lowest walk guys for a couple years, and so it can happen. But what matters to me is the combination of the walk to strikeout rate and then the batting average against, because batting average against is kind of like your filthy factor, right? And so if you're Jackson Jobe and you've got a 180 batting average against your career in the minors or whatever, it's like this is some filthy stuff. But if you've got 4.5, 5 walks per 9 to go with all your strikeouts, you're going to look like Bubic when you get to the pros, and your stuff is not going to. They're going to make you throw strikes. Yep. Your stuff is nasty, but ultimately, when you got to get it over the plate and they start hitting you, and you've got to change your approach, we don't know what we get from you. It could totally change. J. Smith Shawver is the same way. Right now, he's really struggling with that walk side of things, and he's one of my fades. Totally not interested in the guy because of that issue right there. Massive strikeouts, filthy stuff, but that walk is such an issue that when he gets to the pros, I think we're not going to see the same success we're seeing in the minors.
Yeah, no, I definitely shy away from pitchers, particularly in the upper minors, who are struggling with their walk rate, command as well. I start to fade them pretty heavy. When they're younger, like 17, 18, 19 years old, I'm more forgiving about it because there's like development ahead, and I'm looking more for strikeout percentage at that point. And scouting reports, whether they have multiple pitches, and whether people project them as a pitch that's going to be coming a more of an out pitch to complement the fastball or whatever their primary pitch is. But that's interesting. I mean, I've had a lot of guests on over the last couple of years, and people get bullish on starting pitching, and then most people fade it. At one point or another, everybody's like, I can't do this anymore. It's been bitten too many times. And I could – go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess what I'm saying on that walk and batting average thing, it's like I know that the batting average against is not going to be 180 in the pros. So they're going to have to change their approach to get to 225, 240. They're going to have to throw more strikes. And what I'm saying is if the guy's super dominant in the minors, but he's walking people, it's going to be a catastrophe when it gets to the pros. But if he's dominant and keeping the walks down, I don't care if the strikeouts are only maybe 1 per inning. That's okay. He's going to pitch that same way in the pros. The approach he will take, the pitch selection he will make, and the situations, are going to be the same, and we're going to get a similar result, I think.
Yeah, that is incredibly important. And they end up hitting the ground running more often than the other types of pitchers who strike a lot of people out but struggle with command. And that matters in the ABL, right, from a contract perspective. Because you get that cup of coffee, right? And in year 2, you have to make a contract decision. And if that kid's still walking the park, but he's got sexy strikeout numbers, what are you going to do with him? You really going to extend him?
2 years.
Right. How many years is it going to take before he starts being worthwhile having, right? So, and then you factor in on top of that the injury risk, that goes along with pitchers. Whereas a guy who maybe is a little bit less exciting, but coming up, but doesn't walk guys, a guy like Joe Ryan is a good example. You feel more comfortable extending those dudes. So it's interesting in evaluating starting pitching prospects. I've talked about it on the show before. I just try to really buy at a very low cost, which is usually through the waiver wire, and just pick guys up. Rather than trying to expend too many draft picks on them, and I found that anytime I do, I get burned. So,
well, when you can invest in talent like Elijah Green, why would you ever,
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Absolutely. We're gonna, believe it or not, we're gonna talk about Elijah Green on the show today.
Oh, he's on my sheet too.
But yeah, no, he's an interesting character as well. Although he's no longer my team anymore, so he's long gone. He is now Marcus Semien. That's where all those trades have ended up. Is Marcus Semien as my second baseman? Elijah Green created that.
All right.
But let's talk about rebuilding a little bit, because you mentioned that you're in a rebuilding mode.
Yeah.
So let's talk about as we go into the off season.
Yeah.
What's your mindset going into the off season?
Yeah, your audio cut out a little bit there, but I think what you asked is, what am I looking for? What am I trying to acquire in the off season?
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now I'm prospect heavy. I have too many prospects. I can't carry them all into the draft, and so I'm going to be looking to consolidate and improve, where I can. Some of these teams have depleted their farms in order to make a push here at the end, and I was more than happy to ship out the Bassetts and Snells of the world in order to pick up 2 and 3 for 1 on their prospects. And so ideally, somebody's got 3 draft picks, 7 poor slots in their minors. What am I going to do? I would like to send a 3 or 4 for 1 once or twice to pick up somebody that is closer in proximity to the majors, AA minimum maybe. None of the 17-year-old, stuff at this point, because I've got too much of that, and I want to try to balance the portfolio. Maybe somebody who can be a call-up next year and just be a role player for me, because ultimately I'll get Shane Mack back. Strider would be a second half of the year, so I've got to be competitive to make Strider, his return worth something for me, right? My lineup has a couple decent bats that are, the Rookers of the world that I get to retain. But I've got a lot of spending to do at auction. And this last auction was really brutal. So unfortunately, I'm not in a great spot from that perspective. I really need some of these minor league guys that are closer in proximity to help fill out my lineup, so that I can spend more on pitching.
Right. The bane of everyone's existence is pitching. Are there any particular kind of profiles you're looking for? You mentioned like AA or above, so you're looking for proximity. Like above, or you want to start during the great bargain.
Yeah, so your audio keeps popping. I don't know what exactly is going on there, but yeah.
Is that better?
Oh, that's perfect.
All right. I just took my headset off.
Yeah. All right. So you were saying what profiles am I looking for? AA or
yeah,
better?
like are you looking to do a buy low on somebody, like a prospect, maybe the shines come off of him, maybe you think you can get like a good deal on him, or are you looking to like get real conviction on a guy that he's had a great year, you're willing to pay for him, and you're targeting a certain kind of like potential star? What's your kind of mentality, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, so my mentality first off is going to be to look at the major league roster and see where there's opportunity. So you take a guy like Max Muncy with the Oakland Athletics. There's room for him to play. Max Schumann is fine. He's actually had a decent year for $1 or whatever. I think I own him a couple couple spots. But, you know, at the end of the day, Max Muncy is probably a significantly better Max than Schumann. And so is it going to be hard? You know, Geloff, you know, struggled as well. And so there's middle infield opportunity for Max Muncy. He's not particularly expensive out there. I may own him everywhere that I could possibly own him because he's had a bit of a resurgence. We'll talk about that a little later as well. I have him on my crushes. But, you know, I'm going to look for guys that I think have an opportunity in that they're in that AA, early AAA space that the team has a need that they can plug them in. You know, if you're looking at the Red Sox organization, for example, where's Marcelo Mayer going to play? You know, if Story's coming back, Rafael Cedane is doing a fine job. You know, they got several options, you know, middle infield and outfield. You know, so where does Marcelo play? So while I love Marcelo and you know, he's had a resurgency as well, and I think he's probably underpriced for what he ultimately can be. I'm going to prefer a Muncy in this case because I need somebody in the lineup, and I don't know that Mayer gets there at the same timeline. So it will be looking for guys that I think are underpriced, that the luster has worn off. I'm super patient with prospects, probably too patient with prospects. But, you know, I went and got Christian Hernandez, you know, who I really, really like. And everybody seems to, you know, not even believe in the guy anymore. You have Ethan Salas, who, you know, everybody was infatuated with. And then in almost every league I'm in, people are putting him on the block. And it's like, the kid's 18 years old, you know. We can talk about some of his metrics and stats as well, but it's like, you know, he's not close enough, so he wouldn't be a target for me right now. But those kind of guys, the luster's worn off because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And people get hurt. People have psychological issues with their approach. People, you know, have weaknesses that they've got to overcome as tape comes out on them and people start prepping for them. And so I buy the, you know, what is it? Bet the horse, not the jockey, or whatever it is, right? You know, I'm trusting that athleticism, that natural baseball IQ and skill for some of these guys.
Yeah, you actually acquired Christian Hernandez from me.
Yeah, I did. I think we've swapped him 4 or 5 times. Yeah. He's a player that you and I both believe in, and so in the right spot, it's easy for us to come to evaluation on him. But I think I'm going to keep him from now on.
That's right. That's fair. He had a nice little season this year.
He did.
You know, pretty good job running the bases. He got his strikeout rate down. Towards the second half of the season, you saw a little bit of a spike in his isolated power, so he's hitting more doubles, you know, extra base hits. Walk rate went up a little bit. It's a nice little success story. But totally
he's 175 pounds, not projecting to get a whole lot bigger, and he's got like 19 home runs to his name or something, right? Yeah. So that is going to be something that's not attractive to a lot of people. But again, when you go into some of the other metrics that we've talked about, I've got some notes on him here. Let me pull some notes over here. Christian Hernandez has been improving. He's got speed, doesn't have the home runs, but the second base power is there, and he's got a very solid walk to strikeout ratio, which in points leagues is really, really important in addition to a lot of other reasons. But with the speed and the walks, and then he gets some doubles for you, scores some runs, plays in an organization that has an opportunity for him to advance. You know, all those things are reasons I wanted to acquire him.
Yeah, sure. No, I like Christian Hernandez. I think, you know, my hopes of him being a superstar have faded, but he can be like a good regular ball player, you know, add value, particularly in a 30-teamer. So I still have many things.
You mentioned superstar. I think everybody hates prospecting because we all want superstars. And the reality is there just aren't very many of them. There just aren't. You know, and so I never expect a superstar. If I can get a role player on their team, great. If it's an everyday player, that's a grand slam. So I'm chasing guys that I think can play every day. Yeah.
So, you know, I'm definitely interested in getting some buy lows as I go into the off season. I'm going to be retooling my major league roster a little bit after the season's over. And there are definitely some proximity guys that interest me. And, you know, one of them is this guy. Luis Matos in San Francisco, who's had like a tough year, at least at the major league level. But those are his AAA stats versus his BABIP in the major leagues. And the guy makes good contact. He doesn't strike out. He walks a decent amount, not great, but decent. So it's basically a 1-to-1 walk to strikeout rate. And I don't know, he's done that at every level. Had great strikeout rate, makes contact, decent power for an outfielder. I think in a 30-teamer, he's kind of an interesting guy for me. Can run the bases a little bit. Not a speedster by any means, but that's a guy like the type of player that I'm looking at. Tom, I think, has him in this league. He'll probably never trade him. But maybe I can get him in some other leagues. What are your thoughts on Matos?
Yeah, I was not aware that his BABIP was that low. I don't track BABIP in the minors. It's not something that's readily available.
That's his major league BABIP, just to be clear.
Right. So I don't know what his BABIP history has been, but obviously 220 is 50 plus points low on anyone.
Yeah.
So if you're adding 50 points to your batting average at a minimum. And I know it's not 1-for-1 because you've got strikeouts and home runs and stuff like that that aren't in the computation. But, if you're looking at 50 plus points of somebody who's got a 1-to-1 walk to strikeout ratio, those are my weaknesses. My favorite offensive player is Jose Ramirez. And, I traded Rougned Odor for Jose Ramirez after Rugi hit 30 home runs and looked like, the next coming of Ian Kinsler, not glove wise, but maybe right hook wise. But he was coming off a 30 home run season. Jose Ramirez had done like 13 home runs, 16 stolen bases or something. He was a part-time player that year. But I loved the walk to strikeout. I believe he had the pop there. He had all the double, more doubles and all that kind of thing. Minor league history, and so I made the 1-for-1 trade and never looked back. And so those 1-to-1 guys are, first off, if you're not striking out, you're putting the ball in play, and anything can happen.
Yep.
If your BABIP is bad but your strikeout rate is low, you can still put points on the board.
Yeah.
Your strikeout rate high and your BABIP's low, you're not scoring any points.
Nope.
And then if you got a little speed in there, 20, 25 steals, that throws some points on the board for you. Keeps you in the lineup, playing some defense, and then getting those walks. Those are points, those are runs, those are stolen bases that otherwise you have no opportunity to have. So I like that pick for you.
Yeah. Matos has been a guy who's always interested in me, and he's available just about everywhere in every league I'm in. People are cutting him, trading him, 30-teamers make it a little bit harder to cut a guy like that. But you can get him. He's a guy I like. All right, let me show you another one. So here's a split. Who do you think owns that split?
Wow. That is a major jump there. Who would that be? Hauser?
That's a good guess, but it is not Cowser. But that's a good guess. That, my friend, is Elijah Green. And I point this out. I mean, Elijah has a lot of work to do, right? But he's still a kid. He's an A-ball, right? I just happened to look up at his numbers going into the show because I thought you might mention him. And I wanted to see what his second half, because I had read that he had started to hit the ball. And when I saw this, I was like, oh. And what really struck me here was the 352 on base percentage.
I was about to say the biggest thing that jumps out at me here is 267 at 352.
Yeah. It's a big jump. And his strikeout rate is still high, but it's not as high as it has been. It was ungodly high, but now it's high. But it'll be very interesting to watch a kid like this and what happens to him, going into next season. And you probably can still get him dirt cheap. He's a free agent in some leagues that I'm in. But is he worth a 4th-round draft pick? If you can get him for that, maybe. But keep an eye on that. It's just interesting.
Yeah, he's somebody that I really just don't like.
Sure.
And
with good reason.
Yeah, because his price price to expected outcome has just always been off. 4th round pick. Would I spend a 4th round pick on a 1st rounder who has, 3 years to figure it out? Sure, why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, if that's the price, I'm all in that deal. But it's hard for me to like him. He's really got now that second half obviously looks a little better, but he's still a hard one for me to trust.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I just thought it was interesting more than anything else because people are ready to like shoot him like he's a lamed horse, But like,
right.
I don't know,
Right.
I'll check back in on him like next season, see what he's doing. But I just thought that was interesting as we get to, towards the end of the year and you think about targeting people to buy low on, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure he's going to be available that low, but I certainly wouldn't pay more than that right now myself, given his track record. But it's interesting.
Sure.
Let me show you another guy who interested me anyway. I'm interested in your reaction. Is Brady House of the Nationals?
So it's interesting because I have a stack of cards over here, and Brady House's first Bowman is the top card on the thing, and I was like, I should put that in a sleeve. I think he's going to be a little better than he was looking for a while.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a little blurb on him in Baseball America today, actually, and he was talking about his contact rate in the zone and how it's really improved this season. How some of his other metrics, aren't that sexy. But when you look at this, these are his AA numbers. So he has more at bats at AA this year than at AAA. But if you look at that, I mean, strikeout rate, rate is okay, not great, right? Still doesn't walk a ton. But that isolated power and the low BABIP relative to his other levels is kind of interesting. But when I read that little blurb about him at Baseball America, I was like, well, maybe there's something there. He's still pretty young. He's 21 in AAA.
Yeah.
So that's just something that caught my attention. Is he a guy you can get low? Like, I think you still have to pay a pretty, a good amount for him in the ABL, but like, is it first round value? Probably not.
So he's one that I'd be interested in because I think there's opportunity in his pro club for him to get on the field.
When you were saying that, this is I thought of him and I was like, oh, like this is going to resonate because he's a guy.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, he's going to come up. He's going to play. They're probably going to give him a long leash. And I think there's he's shown power at different levels, notwithstanding his other struggles. And he hasn't really put together a full season yet, so you'd like to see that. But he's going to get a good run at AAA next year and could get called up mid-season, next summer. So it's an interesting guy to me anyway to keep an eye on.
Yeah, you make an interesting comment there about want to see him play a full season. Baseball 6 days a week for 26 weeks, whatever, is brutal. It's grueling. And I'm, light years away from an apex athlete and, in terrible shape compared to where I used to be. But I mean, I struggle to play one game a week sometimes, the whole league does. There's just constant injuries that come up with the game. And, it's like, I'm always, my arm's sore, my hamstring's sore. I tweaked my back. I was just taking batting practice Saturday and, did something to scar tissue where I had broken my thumb. And so, I'm not hitting for 3 or 4 days. And it's like the major leaguers who are in fantastic shape and have the nutrition plans and the people who massage them and take care of them and do all the things, right? But they still play hurt. They still get hurt and they still have to show up and play. And minors have an intense schedule, but it's not as intense as the major league schedule, particularly when you add in travel, right? And trying to live a life and all those kinds of things. And that's a very fair point as well. Off the field kind of stuff, history, all things you're looking at to be like, is this guy somebody that can show up and play 150 plus games in a year? That's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned it with respect to him is he's had real lulls in consistency where he's just kind of like struggled for a while, then he turned it on for a short spurt. So the talent is there, and I would just like to see. And I don't know why that is because we're just not close enough to these players to really.
Sure.
Is it,
well,
is it
you
off
know,
stuff? Is it just an attitude, or is it just he's physically not in great shape? I don't know.
yeah,
You know?
baseball's 90% mental and the other half is physical. So, you know,
Right. It's a great quote. Good. Anybody else that like caught your attention in preparing for the show that you think is an interesting prospect going into the off season?
yeah, Gavin Cross is somebody that I'm pretty happy with. I bought him wherever I could. And I bought him because Duke drafted him. And so
Right.
it's like, well, if Duke's drafting this guy, then, you know he's going to turn into a 7-year ABL extension all-star, right? Because that's, Duke just grabs a prospect and he becomes Juan Soto. But I'm just kidding. But no, he picked 112, 114, whatever it was, maybe even 110 in the draft. And I had the 7 and the 9, I think. And I took, I took Colas and maybe Nito and Spencer Jones or something. And then right after that, I'm waiting to see what Duke's going to pick to let me know how stupid I was. And he picked Gavin Cross. And I was like, okay, interesting. But Gavin Cross plays for an organization that really wants talent. They've got a shot to compete in the next 3 to 5 years. The Royals do, if they can, get some bats up there. They're playing some very bad bats in a lineup that has some very good bats in it. And so there's going to be opportunity for him to move fast. Your prospect guide had him at 3.98, which is like, 50% below what the bottom guy on the top 100 even is. So 398 is like really not good. Like 4th, 5th round draft pick trade for type thing. And he's doing great. I'm really liking what I'm seeing from him. Ks are a little higher than I'd like to see, but the walks are really high as well. So kind of balances that out a little bit. You can tell maybe if he's figuring some things out there. But he's got the speed, he's got the pop, and he's putting the ball in play, and his average is pretty good. So somebody that I'm definitely interested in taking a look at. Trying to go with guys out of the top 100 here.
Sure.
Connor Norby, I can't believe Baltimore traded him. The guy's gold in my mind. I'm like, this is exactly what you want, and they dealt him. And I'm pretty sure he went to Miami, right?
Yeah, he just got called up by the Marlins today, actually. He's in the lineup.
Yeah, so he's going to play. Like that. I mean, he went from a logjam team where he's a very strong AAA performer, great resume, all the things, 40 doubles last year. He's got some speed, good walk, strikeout ratio, pop in the bat, and just didn't have a spot in Baltimore. 5 years ago, he'd been, their number 3 hitter probably. But he goes to Miami, which is a great landing ground for him. I don't know that I can get him, but he would be somebody I'd be interested in as well.
Yeah, well, he certainly struggles at the major league level so far. I mean, we'll see what he does the next 5-6 weeks, whatever's left on the season, in Miami. But yeah,
I hope he's terrible.
Yeah, right. If you're trying to acquire him, you're hoping he tanks, right? You mentioned Baltimore. I mean, at the major league level, they definitely have a logjam of, young talented prospects. But I start to wonder, how many of those guys are going to pan out, right? They have so many of these young hitters, like Mayo's coming up,
Basalo.
Yes, sure. And Stowers, and they've had a bunch of guys come up, and they've shipped some guys out already. Some of that was out of just surplus, but the Orioles have gotten a lot of publicity for being a good organization, and I just think we're going to see that put to the test over the next couple of years, and how many of these guys actually pan out. Rushman's already obviously a really good catcher; he can hit. Obviously, Gunnar Henderson's having a monster season. And I think Jackson Holiday is going to be just fine.
Sure. Well, you know why Gunnar is so good? Because I traded him to Duke. I traded him to Duke first wrong, and so I think I got Aaron Zavala or something for him, so just, yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Duke fleecing the league again.
Yeah. What's interesting to me in Baltimore is Austin Hayes. He was a starter and, the whole year and contributor and $7 to $10 outfielder in a 30 team league, and nobody bats an eye at him being $8, or whatever. And just felt like nothing, just disappeared. And so he's somebody that, not a prospect, but he's somebody that, if his contract is expiring and nobody's renewing him, or if you're playing in a league with redraft or whatever, I would stash him because he could find a greener pasture somewhere else. And he's done it at the major league level. I'm looking for guys like that as well. These major leaguers, Lawrence Butler, whatever, that, didn't look good, but I think they can do it, kind of thing.
I got a guy on my team right now in the ABL is Harrison Bader. He's a guy who just kind of bounces around. I got him for $4 in the draft, and he has value. He plays like a lot. Plays like 4 or 5 times a week. Gets out there. He's batting low in the lineup, which limits his at bats. He's not a gem by any stretch of the imagination. But those guys who get in the lineup and play have value in the ABL for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So you've mentioned the Prospect Handbook a couple times. And so if you had a wish list, what would you like to see the Prospect Handbook for 2025 take into account, or what would you like to see changed in the Prospect Handbook?
I really love all the work you've done there. As a data scientist, I appreciate some of the statistical approaches that you've taken. I like how you explain everything, don't have any issues. Maybe the scouting weight is a little high, in my mind, but that's okay. You got to draw the line somewhere. I get it, right? But what I would like to see is an ABL hit list. So I want to know how many owners promoted a prospect. So the prospect was on their roster when they got promoted. And then whether they got traded or retained, were offered a contract after their 2050 or whatever year we call those now.
Right.
After their first year, did they get extended? So, let's say I had 20 guys that have been called up while they were in my minors. They debuted Dylan Dingler. That counts as one of my denominators. And if he gets extended by anyone, that goes into the numerator as well. And I want to see what percentage of each by franchise. Now if I trade him to you, and then he turns into fire like Gunnar Henderson and gets extended, okay, that still counts as somebody that I had in my minors that got extended. So
interesting.
I would like to see what that looks like.
Interesting. I made it a partner to do that with the ABL because it requires some historical analysis to tracing these prospects. They get traded quite a bit, but that is interesting. You could tag them the original team. You mentioned the scouting grades. You might feel like they're overly weighted. I'm actually, one of the things that I'm going to be doing next year for the handbook is integrating statistical performance more than I've done in the past. So I'm going to use a handful of metrics, both for hitters and then for pitchers, and I'm going to weight those, which will detract from the scouting weight. And I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to integrate it. I'm going to talk with Tom in the offseason about how mathematically to do that. But for example, the concept is to actually weight the scouting tools, backing them up by the statistical analysis. Like, for example, if you have a hitting tool grade of a 60, but you're striking out 30%, right? It's going to have a negative impact on your
You might be Spencer Jones.
Yeah. Right. Or if you have a power grade of 60, but you have an isolated power of 230, it's going to go up, right? You're going to get bonus, right?
Right.
And then you have to think about what's statistically relevant, how many plate appearances do you really need for those numbers to mean something? So I've started to look at, sample size and, what, pages like Baseball America and Baseball HQ view as the relevant statistical sample size for various, metrics.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mean,
what's your reaction to that?
You take a guy like Rainer Arias, right? And it's like this sample size of, 80 at bats, and he's got a 1400 OPS, and everybody's salivating over him. Obviously you need to incorporate that into his rating, but it's also 80 at bats or whatever it is, And then he comes back the next year with 350 and it's an 800 OPS, still playable, right? Still good, but we now see 400 at bats of 850 OPS, and we're gonna maybe take that into account more in the next round. He gets dinged from where he was per se, or maybe he doesn't get a bump at 80 at bats, right?
Right, and it's hard in the minors because they switch levels and the competition level changes, and also the parks change. There's some parks that are just like notoriously bad hitters parks, and vice versa.
Sure.
There's some parks where the numbers are like pinball machines, right? So how do you really kind of account for that? It's very difficult, and one of the limitations for me with the handbook is that I have a full-time job. And so like it's not doing the handbook. So I have to kind of figure out like, I have to do a sanity check. There's like what I would like to be able to do, and then what I can realistically do.
Sure.
And so for, next season, as we go into the draft season, I'll be actually getting ready for trial in a case. So I'm going to really figure out how I'm going to get the handbook done, but I'll figure it out. But those are one of the things that I'm trying to implement and giving some thought to, and for pitchers as well, which is probably going to be walk minus K minus walk ratio.
Right.
Maybe a couple other factors. I have to think about that, but I'm going to elicit Tom to assist me, and hopefully he's gentleman enough to do it again, because
awesome.
He takes care of all the math. Anything else in the handbook that you'd like to see changed or accounted for?
I'm biased because this year I finished like 24th or something like that, and it's because my mean is well below my median. Mm-hmm. So I have 7. Well, I had. Now my team's radically different, and I've added a lot more talent, and it would be a wildly different score now. But at the time, I had one guy that was like 0.18.
Yeah.
Allen or whatever, right? And so it's like, well, you just took my 10 and cut it into a 5 because you threw a 0 on there. But at the end of the day, I'm not actually penalized because I have a 0. I mean, like, I might as well just have a blank spot, but my 10 is still a 10, right? But so my average was like 3.8 or whatever it was, but my median is like 5.
Right.
And so, maybe something that said that weights the top half, or if you're takes a median versus average calculation and gives a weighting in one direction or another.
Right.
So you're not, if you have 3 10s, you could outperform 75% of the league with just those 3 dudes, right? But yet the ranking is going to put you in the bottom if your other 17 are all 1s.
Right.
So
Understood.
From a mathematical standpoint, that felt a little trippy to me.
Yeah. It's interesting because Tom and I were like talking about that at one point in the off season before I put the book out, and that's definitely something we can putz around with, because you could rank the systems in a variety of different ways.
Sure.
And it changed from year 1 to year 2. So year 1 I just did a total. I added all the points up, which obviously like penalized people didn't have a full roster.
Right.
Didn't have 20 guys, right? It helped guys in some respects if you had 3 10s, right? Because there's just cumulative, right? And so this year, in 2024, I shifted to kind of an average, like what was their score. So you could fiddle with it.
I think from a practical standpoint, let's just say the bottom 10 are like darts, totally darts, and so maybe you just take like an average of the top 10, or an average of the top 7, which would be like your top third, right? And
Right.
and that is a score. So, you weight that at say 50%,
Interesting.
the median at 25%, and the average at 25%, and then you combine that or something like that. That might make more sense, to say, okay, this is what the franchise actually is. Their top 7 are nails. Even though the rest is no good, they're going to finish in the middle of the pack, because they've got these 7 nails.
Interesting.
Yeah, something like that maybe.
All right, I like that suggestion. It's a good idea, Sam. So, I'll definitely talk with Tom about that. I mean, that's something that makes sense and is certainly doable. And it's interesting. The handbook serves really 2 functions. One is to kind of give a fun kind of evaluation of the various farm systems that are out there, like, who's the best prospecting owner out there, right? And that's really what we're talking about. The other is to actually evaluate the players. And, to me, that's actually the part that is more intellectually interesting to me. That's why I spend so much time thinking about the weights and what metrics I'm looking at and scouting grades. Is there a way to objectively, or as objectively as possible, like really distill value out of these prospects? So that's like a dragon I'm still chasing.
Yeah.
But we'll see. So maybe I'll get Tom to work on that the system rankings a little bit. Put some of his brain power to use. But I appreciate the suggestion. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Actually, I was going to say that might be a good segue into the crushes and fades, because I went through your top 100 and I picked out. Actually, I picked fades and then I looked them up and was surprised at how highly ranked some of these guys were. So I wish I owned them, because I'd sell them for my crushes, which were rated much lower, and then I'd be a happy man. But if you're ready, we can transition to that part.
Yeah. Let's do it. Lay it on me.
Yeah. So I think I got about 12 crushes, maybe 7, 8 fades, and then some buy low opportunities here. But crush number 1 is Robbie Snelling. He had a really bad first, 2/3 of the year. He gets traded to Pensacola. I can go watch him. He plays like 3 miles from my house in the most beautiful minor league ballpark in the United States. And he's lighting Pensacola up. I mean, just fantastic. Only 14 innings in, right? But who knows? Maybe it was a ballpark thing. Maybe it was a coaching staff thing. I don't know what it was. But this is what I was expecting from Robbie Snelling. And and
I
again,
just acquired him in a league, for the same reasons. I just acquired him.
And there's room in the major league roster for him to play, right?
Yeah. It's Snelling. There was an interesting article on him in Baseball HQ recently. One of their top scouts actually went to go watch him pitch in Pensacola. And he was talking about adjustments that Snelling had made, and how his view is that the coaching staff change really made a difference.
Yeah, it does. They can't, for sure.
And, the stuff is there, but he was really struggling with his fastball command and some of his approach. I think it threw his whole game off, and San Diego just couldn't fix him. And, so we'll see. I think he's an interesting story going into next year. I agree with you. He's an interesting crush.
But he's a good buy to anyone who's not watching your show, who doesn't know that his last 14 innings have been great, and they just look at 5, 6, 7 ERA, whatever it is. Let me dump this guy and move on to the next. And the next crush is probably no surprise on the pitching side is Jackson Jobe. The guy's legit. He's awesome. I've been a fan of him from day one. Him and Frank Mazzucato, who is actually my first fade, is Mazzucato. I was big on both of those. Mazzucato's out of Connecticut and high school guy and looked really good, but he's been struggling. But Jobe is legit. He's a real deal. Detroit's got room for him. This is a guy that's going to be in the major leagues, probably at spring training, if not sooner, I think he's who you want, staying in the Detroit realm. Jace Young, he's 78. So Snelling's 23 on your top 100. Jobe's 13. Young is 78, and I think that's embarrassingly low for a guy that's a real ball player. I I looked at a lot of the guys in the 50s, 60s, 40s, and I would take Jace over all of them for the most part. Not all of them, but most of them. Home run double combination is great. His walk to strikeout is great. He's putting the ball in play. He's hitting for average. He's getting on base and he's hitting for power. I mean, what do you not want from the guy? And again, he's with a franchise that needs that kind of talent right now. He's not blocked. He's going to play. Connor Norby, not in the top 100. We talked a little bit about him, so I'll skip to Ethan Salas, number 10. Buy this guy everywhere you can. He's struggling, but he's so young. I'm not worried at all. He's got good doubles pop, and he's 18 years old. I think that 24 months from now, everybody's going to be looking back like, why didn't I grab him off the hot stove when he was there?
Yeah, now's the time to get him, if you believe. I mean, we've talked about Ethan a lot on this show over the course of the year, and John of the Tigers was on last episode. He actually has Salas, and says I'm not selling him because at this point I got to hold him. But DeVries is another guy who struggled earlier in the year, and now he's hitting, and he actually did get moved. By Tyler in a big trade this season. But I thought that was a really good buy low on a kid like that. And he was actually one of the guys. Go ahead.
In TFE, I actually traded Gunnar Henderson for DeVries and some other pieces. And then I traded DeVries for Luis Castillo. And I somewhat regret that, but I'm going for it. I needed the pitching, and so I went with it. But DeVries was one that I really wanted to play out with, and maybe I'll get him back. You know how that goes. But I agree with you there. Yeah, I agree with you there. DeVries is a good one. Yeah.
So who else you got?
I got Tink Hintz, number 58. Really, thrilled with Tink. Solid walk rate, incredible strikeout rate with a great batting average against. This is a guy that's getting a filthy batting average against, but he's keeping the walks down. So this is what I was talking about. I don't think his approach will change when he hits the major leagues. We're going to see, to a lesser degree, but much of what we're already seeing from him. Totally on board with him. We already talked about Gavin Cross and Max Muncy, but Max Muncy, 28 doubles 2 years ago, 35 doubles last year. He's turning those doubles into home runs already. He's basically matched his prior year home run totals, and he's a couple hundred bats under, what he finished the year at, prior years. So really impressive there. Christian Hernandez, we talked about him. Marcel Lemire, this guy's like 1-1 talent, and he hasn't had a bad year. He hasn't had 1-1 years, but he's getting better. So it's not like this is a surprise you'd have a crush on him, but I think that you could trade guys. He's 31 on the list.
Yep.
And I would trade guys that are ahead of him for him in a heartbeat. I think he's projectable. You look at Lawler, who's on my buy low list, significantly less projectable because of size in my mind.
Yeah.
Now, Lawler's an incredible baseball player, and I think everybody should be trying to buy Jordan Lawler right now. But Marcel Lemire is a much more projectable ball player, I think.
Chase the injury issues that Lawler has. Which is another factor you have to consider.
Absolutely. Chase the Lauder, number 18. Lots of good stuff to look at there. I need to see some bigger improvements from him at the plate because he doesn't have the speed. But, and I hate to say this because Brendan drafted him when I took Spencer Jones. I always hate to give Brendan kudos, but, that was a good pick by him. Tyler Black, we talked a little bit about him. Elite walk to strikeout rate, incredible speed, good pop. He's going to play. The Brewers rotating everybody in their infield all the time. He's going to get playing time eventually I know he came up and he didn't do so hot. So I would be a buyer there where I don't have him. Onto the fades, Mazzucato, talked about him. Walks are just staying too high, and his Ks are falling way down. So it's like, when you see the walks going up, but the Ks are staying up, it's like, all right, he's just trying to be too filthy. He just needs to relax and trust his defense. But when the Ks are coming down and he's still walking people, that's a real big warning sign for me.
Yep.
AJ Smith-Shawver, we talked about him. Home run problem. He can't keep the ball in the ballpark. His walks are an issue. And then when you give up the long ball, it just kills you. The Braves are great with pitching prospects. Look at Schwellenbach right now, but I'm a fade on him. I have Elijah Green here. He's 60 on the list. Don't know how he's 60 on the list, but
he was liar the year before.
Yeah. I'm just not a buyer there unless it's affordable, like we talked about. This one might be controversial. Next couple might be Spencer Jones. Fade on him. Average is too low. No speed. And his strikeouts are too high for his walks. He's a power hitter. He can have the strikeouts, but he's got to get the walks, and he doesn't have them. I think he's got like 31 or something. I mean, it's low. That's not good.
I'll pause you right there on Spencer Jones for a second, because I've actually read some scouting reports that concern me about him too. I think you're going to start to see some scouting reports change on him, particularly on his hit tool. But I've read some reports like just wondering if he's ever really going to get to the raw power in a way that's meaningful in games.
Because
of his hit tool and his chase rate, and just a lot of negativity in the scouting reports I'm reading about him, which is in stark contrast to what it was like a couple years ago.
Sure.
So the interesting thing about the handbook, you talked about Elijah Green, he fell considerably, he was much higher prospect the year before. The scouting grades tend to be a little bit slower in like dinging a prospect, because they're not going to give up on it.
You mentioned that in the book.
And so if I factor in these statistics, these metrics, I think you're going to see a downward push on some of these guys a little bit earlier and further down. So a guy like Elijah Green would have gone further down on the list, if I had implemented this change last year. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, what kind of impact it has on the top 100 or any of these prospects, going forward. Anyway, just an observation.
Termarr Johnson, he's 54. He's got more home runs than doubles. I never like to see that. Obviously, I'd love to see a lot of home runs, but not when it's outpacing at the ratio that he's got going on. The average is poor. The speed is poor. I know he's supposed to be a great athlete. Elijah Green's supposed to be a great athlete. But, I'm in the college recruiting process with my sons right now. We're actually getting on a call with a representation company tomorrow to talk through some of the stuff. And one of the things that the agent or rep or whatever they are said was, for every other sport we represent except baseball and softball, athleticism is the number one thing they're looking at. They're looking at your 40 time, your 60 time, your squat, your all the things, your pop time, everything. In baseball, it's almost like it doesn't matter because it's so much of a skill sport. And I almost wonder with guys like Johnson and Green, if they're such great athletes, that they're getting credit for that, but the skill is not where it needs to be. So I'm out on Johnson. Ivan Melendez, already talked about him. All home runs, no doubles, terrible Ks, no walks. He's like Jones, only worse.
How do you really feel about him, Sam?
Yeah, right. And these are all guys that I was heavily into. So this isn't like I'm sitting here like I told y'all so. I wanted all these guys to work out. They would have been on my crushes 12 to 18 months ago, and their fades. Carson Williams breaks my heart. I love Carson Williams. I want him to be really great, but he doesn't have enough doubles for my liking. The K rate's higher than I want it to be. Lower walk rate than he needs to be, and I wrote here speed that does not translate to major leagues, and we talked about that. The way the Rays platoon and all that kind of stuff, I'm wary about Rays players anyways. But Carson Williams, 29 overall, I'm a fade on that. And then the last one, I saved this one for last just for you, Dylan Lesko, 16 overall. I can't do it. I sold them everywhere. I just can't do it. Now he could be like a Roy Halladay who figures it out and fixes the walk problem, but I think he's RP bound.
It's interesting. Lesko's now that he's in Tampa Bay. I'm very interested to see what happens with this walk rate. This is his first season off of Tommy John, really his first full season. Strikeout rate's been really good. Walk rate's been horrific. And so we'll see what the Rays do with him. It's like telling to me that the Rays acquired him. So
I hear you. If anything, it's like Duke getting you in ABL when the Rays get you in the MLB.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, so we'll see. We'll see. I mean, let's put a pin in that, right, and revisit it next year, because I'm very interested to see what happens with him. Because it'll be a full year removed from his Tommy John next season, and if the Rays can get his command in order, I mean, this kid did not have this problem coming up, and obviously he got hurt, but it'd be very interesting to see what goes on with him. And the Padres have done a great job identifying talent and a very poor job, generally speaking, of developing it.
Yeah, fair.
They traded away, and I mean, Jackson Merrill is a notable exception to that. I mean, he's had a great season for the Padres. But this is an organization that traded CJ Abrams. I mean,
Abrams, yeah.
I mean, kid can play. And Mackenzie Gore's a guy who really struggled with his command in San Diego. They couldn't fix him. They couldn't fix Robbie Snelling, right? These guys go to other organizations and they're playing. They're pitching better,
I know.
And so we'll see. But I hear you on Lesko. I mean, look, I mean, he's a guy I spent a high draft pick on. The injury certainly does not help.
You traded up to get him from.
I did.
To get,
I did. First round.
Traded up. He was actually someone I was going to take, so you made the right move there. But I know we talked about that back then, but I'm not saying I wouldn't own him. It's just with guys that were really, really highly touted, they get the fanboy, thing going on, and then the rose-colored glasses come out, like what I'm hearing from you, and it's like, well, I can't sell them at pennies on the dollar.
Well, I traded him in ABL.
I know, but just by and large, a lot of these guys, they're like, well, I'm kind of sunk cost. I need to just hang on and see what happens. Last thing I got here is the buy lows.
Yeah.
Drew Jones. I've always been against Drew Jones. He's a little small, for my liking, for what, for a 1.2 pick. And he's actually quietly creeping back in my mind. And I think he would be really cheap. I know his cards are really cheap, and it's probably a decent investment to try to see where that goes for him. He's really young, right? You get these high schoolers, and it's like, okay, you just don't know what you're going to get when they're facing college, post-college, international competition. But Jordan Lawler, we talked about him. Robert Gasser, 6'9" in the handbook. I think he's legit. I think he's very legit. 7's a high score, right? So I'm not saying the handbook's not saying he's not. But he just went down, injury wise. But I would snag him up in a heartbeat, absolutely. The other two are Painter and Tiedemann, and I wrote them down before I looked them up, and they're 4 and 7 in the handbook, and it blew my mind because of the injury history. I get it. They're the apex arms, right? Just filthy stuff. But the injuries there are tough, especially on Tiedemann. But both of these probably have too big of a following for people to sell them low. And I'm not paying 4 to 7 out of 100 on them. But I want to own both of them. I want to own both of them, though.
Yeah, no, they're interesting buy lows. You'll see that the handbook is going to do something about injury risk with pitchers to kind of push those guys down too. I have to figure that out. That's one of my off-season projects. but yeah, I like that. Tiedemann and Painter. Painter, I'm more in on than Tiedemann, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well,
it's been great having you back on. I'm gonna actually run out of battery in a hot second. But really a lot of fun. I'm glad we had a full podcast. So we could really talk and catch up. Glad. Good luck with your sons tomorrow with the recruiting, and that's exciting stuff. Yeah, and enjoy the fishes. Hopefully just do your job and lose to the Orioles and ABL this week, so I can clinch up this.
Don't worry, I can do that. I can do that one.
All right. Maybe we'll work a deal off in the off season. I'll be trading some pieces. So
I'm sure we will.
All right, my friend. Well, great having you on. Thanks so much. And for everybody else watching at home, remember to ABP. Always be prospecting.